just go for it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hi, I'm Chanel, and my pronouns are they, them, and theirs. This is episode 33 of the Piper Nell podcast. I haven't come up with a title for it yet, but it'll be on. Anyway, I'm a knitter, spinner, and designer living in New Jersey. Today is January 31st, 2018, so it's the last day of January. We've made it through 1 month already, and it is the super blue blood moon. Alright, so anyway, I am Piper Nell everywhere on social media, Instagram, Ravelry, Facebook. There are show notes for this podcast in the Ravelry group, the Piper Nell podcast. And you may notice that today I am wearing my Linland shawl. This is a shawl I knitted a while ago. And I built my own gradient kit with yarn from Yarn Cafe Creations, who is the lovely Christy, who's also one half of the Girls in the Yarn Cafe podcast. So, hey, if you're watching. Yeah, it is a worsted weight shawl, so it's super warm and woolly. And I also have a blanket on my lap, and then I have my wool sweater on the back of my chair because it's kind of cold in my apartment today. But anyway, you didn't come here to listen to me bitch about the cold. So for today, I have some news about any teaching engagements that I have. And then I have some knitting projects to talk about. I do have a spinning segment this week. And then I have on my radar. So let's get into news. Last time I mentioned the Helicase pattern. It is now officially released. It is for sale on Ravelry as a Ravelry download for $7, and it is a stranded colorwork scarf knit in the round with a DNA motif. So if you are a science person or you know a science person, especially in biology, and you want a very classy way to show off their science interest, you should totally check out the pattern. I'm just super excited to release it, and thank you so much to everyone for the support so far. Thank you to Ramona for tech editing it and being really, really helpful in making sure it's accurate and just a well-written pattern. I hope it is. And yeah, I'm just really excited to have it out. So Helicase, check it out. And next bit of news I have is that the Montclair Flare shawl is going to be released publicly tomorrow, February 1st. We'll see if this episode is out by then. But tonight at the store Yarnia in Montclair, New Jersey, there is going to be a sneak preview of it where you can buy a copy in person, and we'll be opening a second round of the knit along open to the public, and you can bring your own colors. Our first round of the knit along was exclusive to Kickstarter backers of the store, back when the owners were getting their startup for the store. So I'm excited to put the pattern out to the public. I hope that my background isn't too messy. I think my camera angle's a little lower than usual. Anyway, so that's pattern release stuff. And then I do have some teaching coming up. As I mentioned the store before, I work at Yarnia as an associate and an instructor, and I have some classes coming up. So one is I'll be teaching a series on knitting your first sock. So this is a beginner-friendly sock class in 3 sessions where we'll be going through a basic cuff down sock. And the 3 sessions will cover the cast on, the heel, and the toe. And then the second class I'll be teaching is the stranded colorwork hat, which will also be beginner friendly. For both these classes, you are assumed to know how to cast on, knit, and purl, and decrease. So we'll be introducing some new techniques to add to your repertoire and really get you to branch out with your knitting. So with the stranded colorwork hat, this is friendly to someone who's never done stranded colorwork before. and we'll be taking you through a simple colorwork hat. And then, well, I actually do have one workshop coming up this Saturday. I figured it's kind of too last minute notice to promote that, but that's the Quick Knits class, and that is even more beginner friendly. You just need to have taken the shop's beginner lesson, and it will also be kind of a boot camp for new techniques where you can crank out some small items and as part of a gift set. So at my next teaching engagement is going to be at Chelsea Yarns, which is in Red Bank, New Jersey. This will be my first time coming to the store, and as a customer too. I'm going to be shopping there. So I'll be teaching my Toe Up 2 at a Time socks class at Chelsea Yarns. So you should totally get in touch with them and sign up. It is an intermediate sock class. So you should be familiar with Magic Loop before taking the class, and also have knit it is recommended that you have knit a pair of socks before. I've had a student take the class before, or a couple of students take the class before with no sock experience, but they had plenty of Magic Loop experience. So if you consider yourself an intermediate knitter comfortable with Magic Loop, then this class is for you. And if you want to learn how to make socks 2 at a time, toe up. So no second sock syndrome, no guessing if your socks are the same length or not, just 2 at a time, toe up, and you can use up all your yarn. So that's it for news. That was kind of babbly. So that moves me on to some knitting projects. Knitting! The first project I want to talk about, I already talked about the pattern, but as part of the first round of decal, I'm working on my own copy project version, that's the word. I'm working on my own version of the Montclair Flare using the custom colorways dyed for the shop. So I tried to finish it by today. Tonight was supposed to be, the big release thing, and a bunch of people in the knitting group were racing to complete it, and I didn't complete it. Last night, my last grad school lab was due, so I had a choice between finishing that or finishing the shawl. And I love knitting, but life is like my work and career. I need to take care of that, so I had to submit my last grad school lab. But anyway, that's done. Yay, so I can knit a lot now. A lot more. So this is my version of the Montclair Flare shawl. It starts out as a center out crescent shawl. So you start off the garter tab and you do some textured garter based stitch, which I call the brush stitch. It's based on some stitch patterns that I saw on YouTube. It's basically you pull up extra loops in rows below the one that you're working, and you create a flowery brushy pattern on a garter background. And then before your shawl gets too wide, because that's one thing that can get in the way of crescent shawls or center out shawls, is that towards the end your work is just huge and you're working on hundreds of stitches. Before your work gets too cumbersome, you cast on stitches for basically a deep knitted on border, and as you're going, you grow so you knit side to side a deep knitted on border that grows the shawl, but also binds off the shawl as you go. And this shawl basically has no bind off. So after the first section, the crescent section, you have a series of wedges and mesh panels, and I am on the last mesh panel. I gave up last night because I was doing a combination of procrastinating and knitting. Procrastinating. And then I'm like, crap, I really have to get this done. So I put my knitting down and just banged out my last essays. So after this last mesh panel, I still have one more garter wedge as shaped. The rest of them are shaped using short rows. This last one is just decreased. But it is almost there. I wanted to have finished this and blocked it this morning, but yeah, last night was just really busy. But anyway, the yarn that I'm using is Ancient Arts Socknado in 3 custom colorways that was dyed for Yarnia. This first colorway is called Rooster and Pop Art, and it is named after... So the way Ancient Arts' custom dyeing works is that you send them an inspiration photo and a rough guideline of what you want the colorway to look like. Do you want it to be variegated? Do you want it to be speckled? Do you want it to be semi-solid? And this was inspired by a photo of a pop art mural that's around town of a giant rooster. It is a really cool mural. And then this green was inspired by photos. The semi-solid green was inspired by photos of parks around towns, because there's a lot of park acreage around Montclair. And it is called Edgemont and Nishuane. Those are 2 of the large parks around town. This Steely Gray is Walnut and Bay, Walnut plus Bay. Those are all in the colorway names. And it represents basically the commuter rails that go across town, and yeah, the metal beams of the railroad. So the 3 colors and the 3 sections, the stitch patterns that they correspond to in the shawl, all represent different aspects of Montclair, which is the town that the shop is in. And yeah, these colors will be for sale at Yarnia starting today, tomorrow, this week. The needles I'm using are US 5 or 3.75 millimeters Addi lace needles. These are my only pair of Addi lace, and I like the tips a lot. They're really smooth and slick. They're not as sharp as ChiaoGu's, I would say. But one thing I don't like about these needles is that the cord is really floppy. I haven't relaxed it or anything, but I feel like that wouldn't really help. I like the stiffness of ChiaoGu cables, and they have very, very little memory. These definitely have memory and kink up on themselves. And sometimes it's so soft that it'll like pop through my knitting. I guess I push hard or something, but yeah, I mean, I do like knitting with them. The join is really nice, and you know, they're serviceable. So that's it for the Montclair Flare. Look out for that pattern available on Ravelry tomorrow, and join us for the second round of the knit along. So the next project that I have, I did show off last time. I've made some progress on it. It is a tapestry that I am knitting on commission, and it was inspired by the mixed media look of a lot of woven tapestries going around the internet. And I was wondering if I could do something similar. Excuse me. I was wondering if I could do something similar with knitting. So this is what I have so far. Let me back up a bit. Alright, so this, I haven't woven in the ends or anything, but this is the center panel. This will be the center panel of a 3-panel tapestry piece, wall hanging. And the way that this is constructed, and the way I've decided to construct do all 3 panels, is it starts out with a garter tab, because I like my shawls. So I did a garter tab cast on. I worked basically a center out triangular shawl with the center spine until the piece measured about 2 feet across, or yeah, this is 24 inches across. And then I stopped increasing at the edges and then started decreasing to create a rectangular chevron-y panel, basically. And I believe if you've done, the Starting Point shawl by Joji Locatelli, the 2 parts are constructed in the same way. Anyway, so as I was knitting it, I did very long dropped stitch rows. So here you see, this is a drop stitch row where I wrapped each stitch twice, and then when I came back around to work those stitches, I dropped a second loop. This really long run where I've woven in some roving, I wrapped the stitch 4 times and then dropped the 3 extra wraps as I came around to work it. And so that left a really nice long ditch, to borrow a term from quilting. to weave in unspun roving. This is Bare Merino top that I got. Not roving, top. This is merino top that I got from somewhere. A lot of this has been in my stash for a while, and I was gradually collecting materials for this project. And then I have some alpaca roving, which has been dyed in shades of blue and green, which is super cool. I think for this stitch, because the alpaca roving is less poofy, I only did 3 wraps on each drop stitch. And then knitted into the fabric is an assortment of yarns. This is like super bulky. This is like bulky acrylic yarn that matched the rest of this yarn. This is ethereal fibers, a sparkle sock yarn that I did make a pair of socks with, and I was using the leftovers. I have some leftovers of Madeline Tosh Merino Light. This is their colorway Esoteric. And then I even knitted 2 rows of Fun Fur in here. And yeah, so you see, so basically the fabric was knit, incorporate the garter ridges of contrasting yarns if I wanted to. And then I actually, before I wove in the roving, I soaked the piece, blocked it to its full dimensions, then wove in the roving, because my reasoning was it would be really hard to weave in the fiber, then block it, because then I would be afraid of felting the fiber. So to keep its fluff, I would block and then weave in. And I still need to weave in the ends. But yeah, I am chugging along on the other 2 panels, and I want them to be identical, so I'm actually knitting them at the same time on the same needle. They are also going to be basically center out triangles. So here is one piece, and then here's the second piece. I'm knitting them on the same needle I did the first panel, which is a US 7 4.5 millimeter needle. So slightly larger than what I usually use for fingering weight yarn to make a very nice open fabric. And these are ChiaoGoo needles. And so, again, these are the red cables that I like so much. And this is more of the Madeline Tosh Merino Light. It's such a pretty color, isn't it? It has so many, it's so multi-dimensional in their colorway Esoteric. That's it for the tapestry project. Just kind of chucking things as I go. Then the next project that I've been working on is the one that I've been working on the most these past couple weeks. It's been a couple weeks since the last episode. Yes. So, if you follow my Facebook page, you might have seen that I had a false start on this. This is a sweater project that last episode I showed the yarn for. And here it is now. Let's make sure I'm holding up this is the front, and I can tell the back, the neckline is slightly higher, and I also have my stitch marker at the beginning of the round in the back, in the center of the back. So this is a self-designed colorwork sweater that I am working on. I have not come up with a name for the design yet. I'm thinking something druid related. I'll talk about that inspiration some more on my radar. But basically, this is a top-down circular yoke sweater. I was trying to do the math, and I was trying to get my hands on Ann Budd's book of top-down sweaters. I couldn't find a copy, or I was too impatient, so before I found a copy, I just cast on the sweater and decided to go with the math that I had worked out using a couple of resources that I found online. So basically, from what I understand of a circular yoke, you need two circumferences. You need the circumference of the neckline and the circumference of the shoulder. And then you need the height between those. So basically, you're knitting a tapered you're knitting a cone with the top cut off. And what happened was I measured the neckline that I wanted. I measured my shoulders, and then for the height, I was supposed to just get the height from the neckline to where the shoulder, the level of the shoulders. But I used the measurement of my neckline to where I wanted the armholes to end. So that was way too, so basically it was a cone whose height was too big. And so instead of being like this with the way my hands are gesturing, it was like this. So the neckline was too tall and not tapered enough. So I ripped it all out, even though I had finished the colorwork chart, and I was knitting a couple of more increased rounds to get to the circumference that I wanted. But I did keep my notes on that increased pattern because it did create a cool funnel neck that I think would be great for a cowl, or maybe a funky sweater. But I knew I wanted a more traditional looking circular yoke sweater, so it had to come out. I got a notification that just cut off the video. Where was I? Yeah, so I live streamed me ripping out the sweater in progress and winding up the yarn. And then I just started again. The second time I started, I did adjust the neckline by a couple of inches. So it was more close fitting, because I do plan on this being a pretty generously sized turtleneck. Anyway, so I've finished the color work at the yoke. I divided for the body, and now I'm just knitting stockinette in the round for inches and inches, but I'm almost done. I am almost done with the body, and I'm about to start the ribbing. I think I need like half an inch more, which is like 4 more rounds of knitting. So let's talk about the yarn, since I've talked about the construction a lot, and its shenanigans. So the yarn that I'm using, this purpley burgundy red, is Blue Moon Fiber Arts Woo-Boo. So it's a bamboo merino blend, and it is their colorway Bittersweet. So it's one of their semi-solids, and I like how you can see little slashes of a darker color, but mostly it is not very strongly varied in the colorway. The yarn I actually got from a D-stash from Rachel of Treehouse Knits, so hi if you're watching this, and it comes in huge hanks. So Rachel was D-stashing. I think she had already made a sweater from this, and she still had a sweater's quantity left, or at least a sweater's quantity for me. I'm a small person. So she sent me 2 8-ounce skeins and then a little extra. And so this yarn comes in 8-ounce skeins. Blue Moon Fiber Arts does large put-ups. I bought a braid of spinning fiber from them that was also 8 ounces, so I can get and most skeins in my hand spun are 4 ounces. So I can get a mega skein out of it, or two normal size skeins. And they're very reasonably priced and dyed to order. So good job, Blue Moon Fiber Arts. The contrasting colors that I'm using 2 contrasting colors. One is, they are both Northlight Fibers Water Street DK. So that is a merino cashmere blend. So it is super, super soft, and it's going to be super warm, which is why I'm keeping, I wanted the color work close to my neck, and I'm not going to do color work on the bottom of the body because that is a high wear and tear area that might, I would be worried about the cashmere yarn pilling. So I'm not putting color work there. I am going to put some on the cuffs so that it's close to my hands and keeps my hands warm. That would be really nice. So anyway, Northlight Fibers, they are a really cool yarn company. They did a trunk show at Yarnia, and I just really like their mission. They're super ethical. They're super into local producing and selling locally. And their colors are just so beautiful and vibrant. So they're a micro mill, so they produce all of the yarns that they sell. So this is their Water Street base, their DK weight yarn in a merino cashmere blend. This color, this green, this leafy green is salt marsh, and this white is snowflake. I don't know if it's undyed wool. It looks kind of undyed. The rest of their dyed colorways in Water Street are very heathery, and I think that's from the cashmere and merino blend, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so I shopped for these two colorways when they came to the store to do a trunk show, and I had the Wuboo yarn first, and so I wanted to pick out a couple of contrasting coordinating colors for a colorwork sweater. So I decided on a leafy green and a white, and I would do very nature inspired colorwork motif. So with the leaves and the ring around the neck, I'm thinking of something druid related for the name of the pattern. It's, you know, like I want something to suggest a connection to nature and kind of this mysticism. I don't know. Anyway, the needles that I'm using US 4s for throughout the project so far. The Wuboo is actually listed as a sport weight. The Water Street is a DK weight. I've found them to be a pretty good match. The Water Street is a little poofier than the Wuboo, I think. But the Wuboo is also on the heavier side of sport weight, I feel. So they have been matching up pretty well. It is just both yarns are just so nice and soft to work with. So I am using US 4 needles, which was the recommended size on the Wuboo's ball band. I'm not sure what size needles the Water Street recommends. I'm betting that a US 4 or 3.5 millimeters is smaller than what they recommend, because I'm getting a very dense, squishy fabric in the color work, which is good. I like that. I'm using a combination of needles, so I had to cast on with 16-inch circulars because you start off with a small circumference, and then as I increased, I switched to a 32-inch circular. I could have switched to an even bigger 40-inch circular, but A, I don't have that, and B, it was just a little bit before dividing for the armholes, so I just divided, and then I was good again on 32-inch. The 16-inch circa cast on was actually a Takumi bamboo needle, right? And then when I switched to 32-inch, that was a ChiaoGoo. I did not notice a difference in the gauge, but if you're worried about your gauge changing when you switch materials of needles, I would just make sure that you have the same types of needles in just with different lengths of cables. But yeah, it's a super fun project. For the rest of the sweater, I'm planning some ribbing at the bottom. I'm actually planning some short row shaping in the back so it dips down a bit. And then when I go back to knit the arms, these, I did leave the armholes purposefully a little big, so there will be quite a lot of positive ease in the arms. And I want to keep it straight for a bit and then taper to the wrists. I have not finalized what the wrist color work will look like. I'm thinking maybe some sort of built-in hand warmer design where the color work ends, there's a thumb hole, and then ribbing covers the hand up to the first knuckle. That would be pretty cool and functional. So I don't know. Yeah, this has been keeping me away from the rest of my knitting projects, honestly. Because it's just plain stockinette. So if I'm watching TV or if I'm listening to something or I have something to be typing on and I need to fidget on something, I just pick this up and knit it. And actually, like, my hands keep wanting to knit on it now. So I'm gonna put this away. I have quite a lot of leftover yarn from the Water Street, which is why I'm comfortable putting in some color work. I think my biggest challenge for this design is going to be learning how to grade sweaters and then determining the amount of yarn used for each color. And so I might have to adapt the instructions for different sizes and, you know, where you can incorporate color work based on the yardage that you need. One thing I like about this color work motif is that it doesn't use a lot of yarn, so I could use a luxury yarn like the Water Street on my budget. And I didn't need a lot of it, and I didn't need a lot of colors. I ended up designing my own sweater because I was looking through a bunch of designs on Ravelry, and I couldn't decide on any, but also I couldn't find, because I had such firm yarn requirements, I couldn't find any that exactly suited the yarn that I had, and I didn't want to buy any more yarn. So designing to the rescue. And that's the last project that I have to show you. I have a kind of project to discuss to finish off this knitting section, and that is just sweater mending techniques. I've been taking some sweater mending commissions for both commercially knit and hand knit sweaters. And so that's been a service I've been just kind of low-key offering through the store, or it's more like the store has had people come in inquiring about yarn related jobs that might not be you know, like strictly selling yarn or selling needles. And as a chronic freelancer, I was in the store at the time, and they were like, you know what, why don't I just take that job? So I've had a couple of people come in. This one person came in with two store-bought sweaters that they had been wearing as layering pieces, so almost religiously. So they had holes worn in the elbows. They had some runs in some snags and other areas of wear. But basically, it was a sweater that had been worn through in parts that, you know, get a lot of abrasion. So what I did was I actually I patched up the large holes by picking up, so if this was the hole on the elbow, I would pick up stitches along one edge. The grain, or the direction of the knitting, was down the arm. So with the stitches, along one row of stitches, I would pick up stitches to make the width of the patch. And I would knit back and forth to make a stockinette patch, and then graft it to the top of the hole. And I would actually knit it a little past the hole. So basically you want the hole entirely covered. And then I could seam the sides down on the patch, and then I would actually flip the piece inside out and sew along the edge of the original hole to the backside of the patch, just to give it some extra reinforcement. So for that one, matching yarn was a little important. The original sweater was a black wool. Not sure what kind of wool, but it was pretty soft, so it might have been merino. I used some, and it was finer than fingering weight. But I was fine using a ball of fingering weight wool yarn that was the same color. It was black. And I actually used Cascade 220 fingering. So that's a 2-ply Highland wool yarn. I don't believe it's machine washable, but I had checked with the person, and they did say that they did hand wash their sweaters, so that's all good. Anyway, so that was an interesting technique that I kind of invented. And then the next one, I had a couple of Aran sweaters come in. These were hand knit. One was by a relative, one was, I believe, purchased in Ireland. And so these more had small holes worn in them, probably not by abrasion, but either by a small cut or a bite had been taken out of it by some critter. So if you have a small hole that's a couple of stitches wide, then what I used was duplicate stitch. I mean, you're not duplicating the stitches over the fabric, you're duplicating missing stitches. So I would start with an existing stitch and then kind of fill in the squiggles, the ups and downs of the rows. And that's how I fixed a small hole. If it was a vertical hole, what you can actually do is seam it just from the inside. And in this kind of repair, I didn't need to match the yarn so carefully. So both Erin's sweaters were from this kind of tweedy wool yarn, and I was actually fine using a coordinating color of an acrylic yarn that or a solid acrylic yarn, and that acrylic yarn will really reinforce that patch and make it stronger in the long term. And then the last thing that I was fixing on the sweaters were small snags. So I think I might even have a snag to show you. But basically a snag in knitted fabric is when you hook the knit onto something and then a bit of yarn's pulled out. So the yarn doesn't break or anything. It's just now you have extra yarn in this stitch. So what you can do is you can ease that extra yarn back into the adjacent stitches. And that I just did with a tapestry needle, or maybe I can do a little right here. Anyway, no, that's too distracting. So yeah, so knitting patches, duplicate stitch to fill in missing stitches, and fixing snags. That's what I've been up to in my sweater mending commissions. So just a little spiel about that. Okay, that was knitting, so that brings me to spinning. Yes, I finally have some spinning to show. I have been spinning very slowly on spindles. Spinning's kind of been on hold because I am waiting on my wheel, which is in the mail, and it will probably be here next time I record. But anyway, I have the wrap up of the Sister Strands project that I was carrying out with Mars of the Hey Brownberry podcast / dyeing extraordinaire behind Dynamics Yarns. And so a while ago, actually right back last year, we decided to collaborate on a spinning and dyeing experiment. So I bought natural undyed top of 2 different sheep breeds and sent them to her to dye, to see how the wool would take. I kept half of the undyed wool to spin first, and then I would send the spun yarn for her to dye. So basically half of the yarn got dyed first, then spun, and then half the yarn got spun first, then dyed. So you should check out her podcast for her half of the dyed, spun first yarns. And I have my half here, which this is the last game that I finished. This is BFL. This is BFL top. I forgot to make a note of the yardage, but it was hanging in my closet for a while, and I finally got the willpower to wash and finish it. So this is a fairly high twist. I would say like DK sport weight. I think like somewhere between DK and sport weight is turning out to be my default yarn. And I spun this on a spindle. This is actually fractal spun. So the way that Mars had dyed the braids was they were dyed in short segments, and the way the BFL took the dye really saturated and concentrated in the parts where she had put the spot of dye, and so there were spots of bare wool in between the dyed portions. And so you see these rich reds, browns, natural spots, a bit of yellow, all throughout the skein. And I think fractal spinning really brought out the variegation, and I can't wait to see this. I can't wait to work with this and knit it up. I have no plans for the yarn yet, but I'm just so happy with the way this turned out. I wanted to compare it to the fin braid that I had spun up a while ago. So she had also dyed up a braid of fin sheep top. And in that wool, it took dye really differently. So the color, instead of concentrating in spots, really migrated and spread out. And after some investigation and some analysis, you might want to check out our video, Sister Strands, which is on my channel, where we talk about this some more. This is at the halfway point of the project. we looked up the staple length and micron count of BFL and fin sheep, and they're about equivalent. So it's really, I think it's really the nature of the individual hairs on fin sheep. There's some property that likes to wick away liquids and moisture that really carried the dye through the hair, through the fiber, and really made the pigment spread out. So this is the fin sheep braid. Compare it to the BFL. They were dyed with the same colors in the same pan by Mars, but turned out, even though the fiber braids turned out really differently. So this yarn is, the fin sheep yarn is almost a semi-solid. It's really not that variegated. When I was spinning it, I didn't even see a point in breaking it up for fractal spinning. I just divided it in fourths and then spun and plied the fourths on each other, because there wasn't really a color progression to preserve. It was just this nice reddish brown kind of semi-solid braid. But anyway, both yarns are super, super squishy. The fin is a lot airier. If you see, it's poofier, it holds its shape better. The BFL has more drape. Yeah, so we'll probably continue this experiment by knitting with these two yarns, so we'll keep you updated on that. But that is spinning. Now my chair over there is all full of projects. And that's the last fibery thing I have to discuss. I have a couple of just nerdy things to mention real quick, because I haven't really been talking about, what I've been up to while I'm knitting. I like to listen to a lot of audio content. So this brings me to On My Radar. So as I might have alluded to while I was talking about my Colorwork sweater, the word druid came up. And that's because I've been listening to a lot of Dungeons and Dragons content. My best friend from college introduced me to The Adventure Zone, which is a Dungeons and Dragons podcast. So you're listening to people play D&D, Dungeons and Dragons for short. And The Adventure Zone is wonderful. The players are three brothers and their dad. The McElroys, if you're familiar, they have a lot of audio podcasts and they're involved in radio production, so you might have heard their name around somewhere. But they got together and played a game of D&D as a family and recorded themselves doing it, and it's hilarious. They're all really funny, wholesome, nice people, and they're just really goofy throughout the podcast. But then they also get really into role-playing their characters and developing their characters, their motivations, their stories. And actually, what starts out as a bunch of pretty goofy, inconsequential jokes develops into this really deep, engaging story over the course of their campaign. And by the end of the campaign, which lasts like 2.5 or 3 years, they take that long to complete. I was crying by the finale. So The Adventure Zone is really good. You should listen to it. It's a lot of content, so binge it. And so after I finished The Adventure Zone, then I wanted more D&D content. I actually haven't played D&D before. I've played a couple of tabletop games. When I was home visiting my parents and my brothers over Christmas, my brothers and I played like a one-shot game of Call of Cthulhu, which is really fun. But I would love to get into a long-term D&D campaign. So if anyone in the area wants to set one up, let's go. Or, let's organize. Or maybe we could do something virtually. I don't know. So yeah, I was hankering for some more D&D content. And it was Carola of the Are You Still Podcasting? What Makes My Heart Happy? She's the dyer behind Otherworldly Yarns, and she has beautiful colors. She's in the UK, and she's also one of my VKN buddies. So she was on VKN talking about Critical Role, which is a D&D video podcast, actually. It was streamed live on Twitch, and they post their recordings on YouTube. And they are a team of professional voice actors playing D&D. And so they have brilliant character voices, and the production value is pretty high. So it's, in that way, it's really entertaining. I would say the Adventure Zone is stronger in its storytelling and its depth of plot, but Critical Role is also great in a different way for its character shenanigans, its interactions. It's a much larger party. So they have a group of 8 people playing with the DM. In Adventure Zone, it's 3 people and a DM. So the dynamics of a larger team versus a smaller team are pretty incomparable. I would say both are really enjoyable. So yeah, D&D podcast, that's what's on my radar. And that's, okay, before I really rant about that too much, I should be going to work soon, so that brings me to wrap up. So thank you so much for watching, listening, whatever you were doing. If you had me on while you were cooking, I really like podcasts for that. Or if you were knitting, I hope you enjoyed your projects. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you for anyone who's checking me out for the first time. I know I'm kind of rambly and weird. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for your continuing support. I think you're familiar with my weirdness now, so no apologies there. Okay, I should stop apologizing. What the hell, Chanel? Oh, that rhymes. I should get that on the shirt. So, thank you so much for listening and watching. I am trying to get on a more regular recording schedule after my last 2-month break, because I was just in a podcasting funk, and I hope that maybe keeping myself on a regiment will keep me fresh and in shape. So you should expect my next episode in a couple of weeks, and so I will see you then. Bye!